I'm Reverend Sue Browning. I am the minister who serves the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Easton, Maryland, and the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River. It's good to be together. I'm glad our members, our friends, our visitors, that everybody has found us here today. You will notice I am going ahead and recording in the sanctuary in Easton today. We have decided it's not yet time to go back to in-person services, but I thought this morning would give this a try to see what it feels like to be in this space for this sermon. So it is summer solstice, and we come together on this, the longest day of the year. It's a place and it's a time of turning. And I think it's also a time that we can consider, how is our society turning? What are the changes we're seeing, and how do we want to emerge out of what has been a spring that we did not expect? As Unitarian Universalists, one of the values that we lift up is equity. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And on this day of the longest light, what is it that you can imagine turning that would help so equity comes forward? That's the way, as Unitarian Universalists, we wrestle with our values, we wrestle with our commitments. And in that process, we find renewal, we find our spots of hope. We come with our struggles, and we bring our joys. So welcome to our service today. If you have questions about Unitarian Universalism, if you have questions about either congregation, please be sure to ask, to check us out on our websites, to track me down through emails. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions. So at this point, breathe deep as we enter our time of worship. Our chalice lighting these words are from one of my colleagues, Adrian Graham. He entitles this chalice lighting reading, "The Struggle for Freedom." We kindle a flame of power illuminating the holy in each of our faces. We recognize in the flame a passionate commitment to our shared faith. We are held and carried from day to day, week to week, in the shining of the light. This flame is mine as well as it is yours. We are brought together on this day, called to growth, called to expansion, all within the glow of this chalice. What does your heart know while beholding this holy fire? Our opening hymn today is "For All That Is Our Life." You have a hymnal, it's hymn number 128, and in just a moment, the words will come up on your screen.
With praise. we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad.
I invite us now into a time of reflection, a time of meditation. Our words this morning are from Reverend Laura Horton Ludwig. What we do matters. Spirit of life and love, we are here because we believe what we do matters. We are here because we believe how we live our life matters. That with every act of kindness or meanness, courage or fear, love or hate, we are weaving the fabric of the universe that holds us all. We are here because we need encouragement, because we need strength, because so often we get distracted, we get in a rush, we don't think, and we choose the easy way, when the harder path is what our spirits really long for. We are here because none of us is perfect, but together we inspire one another to try again, to take another step. We are here because we have felt the stirrings of love and grace in our hearts and hands, and we crave more of that for ourselves, and not only for ourselves, for everyone. We are here because how we live our lives matters. Blessings and amen. We move now into our time of joys and sorrows. And one of the ways that we build our community is by sharing our joys and sorrows weekly. Usually in the time of virtual services, these are emailed into me, but I do want to give a heads up that next week, that will not be the process. We are actually going to, in Easton, watch the General Assembly service together, and at least watch it virtually together, and Chestertown has a Zoom summer discussion. So the process is a little different next week, but that's the general process. So I'm going to go ahead and light all of the candles of joy and sorrow this morning, and then I will read off what they are each for. Our first candle today is for all of those who have died from the coronavirus, those who are ill, those who are recovering, and for all who have helped make us safe, and all of the essential workers in this unusual of times. We light a candle for Dick and Barbara Dowdy. They celebrated their 55th anniversary last week, and we wish them well in their ongoing love and marriage. We light a candle this morning for Larry, who's dealing with a difficult diagnosis. Larry is a leader in the Chestertown community, and we know he continues to pour his heart into his very many roles. So we hold Larry, his wife Peggy, and his sister Karen in our love. We light a candle for Kay, who died this past week. Kay is an extended family member of Linda, Emily, Todd, and Lyndon, and she died from the coronavirus. We hold that entire extended family in love and care. we'd light a candle today for our educators. For those of you who are wrapping up a year that was not the year you expected, all of the work you did for our youth, for our children is seen, it's appreciated, and this is our candle of gratitude for all you've done. And our final candle today is for our musicians. I want to light this candle in gratitude for all that was done last week, and also for the reality, for the many folks who spend their time in choirs, the sadness of not being able to sing in a group, and for the many ways that you've adapted. So gratitude for the so many ways that music has stayed a part of our life in these times. So I ask us just to take a moment as we hold all of the spoken joys and sorrows and those in our heart. Let's just take a moment and hold those joys and sorrows. For all that has been shared, we are grateful. Amen. Our reading today is by Nelson Mandela. I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I've made missteps along the way. But I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I've taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk has not ended. So this week there was an article in USA Today. It was written by Isaiah McKinnon, and he's a retired police chief from Detroit, and he's an African-American man. And he tells in this article about being beaten by police as a teenager in 1957. And he resolved then that he wanted to become a police officer to facilitate change. So he becomes an officer in 1965, and yet in the late 1960s, he was abused by his white colleagues. So he persevered, he rose through the ranks, and as he called out concerns about police practices, he was ostracized. Here's what he shares in the article that he wrote this week. During these years, my mental salvation was education. I earned 3 degrees, including a master's degree and a PhD. When I became the chief of police in Detroit in 1994, it was important for me to root out the bad officers, like those who beat me as a teenager and tried to kill me in 1967. I also built to rebuild trust with the community, which for too long felt that it was at the mercy of a violent and indifferent police force. It was my mission as chief to make a difference in the life of Detroiters. It was incredibly difficult, however, to eradicate implicit biases and systematic racism in the department. When I was the chief of police, a white police officer pulled me over in Detroit one night. He approached my unmarked vehicle and without looking at me, asked for my license and registration. Wanting to see how far this would go, I said, "Yes, officer." At some point, he recognized who he had stopped and he immediately apologized. My question to him was, "Why did you stop me?" He said, quote, "I thought it was a stolen car." The officer was reprimanded for his actions. That happens. And this sermon is not to prove that there is inequitable treatment of people based on skin color. We already know this to be true. In every system and institution in our society, from healthcare to education to employment, banking, real estate, to law enforcement and the criminal justice system, there is inequitable treatment based on skin color. The data is there, and the reality is way more than anecdotes. This is true. The sermon is also not to tell the whole history of violence against people of color in this country that continues today. Our foundation as a country includes white people owning black people as property under chattel slavery, and there was sustained abuse of indigenous populations. Slavery was dehumanizing and violent, both physically brutal and emotionally incredibly cruel. And post-slavery, we've had Jim Crow, thousands have been lynched, segregation, now mass incarceration. It's not the topic of this sermon, but it's important that we remember that all of that is true. Since the death of George Floyd on May 25th, the country and the world has been focused on patterns of abuse and dehumanization that are still faced by people of color. We're appalled, but we should not be shocked. This is not new. 6 years ago, we watched the film of Eric Gardner's death. We watched his murder and his calls saying, "I can't breathe." 5 years ago, we watched the news coverage of a slaughter at the AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. And 3 years ago, we viewed torches being carried across Charlottesville, Virginia. Torches of hate. The playing out of racism and inequitability and violent acts is not new. So what is it about this moment? What is it about Mr. Floyd's death? Are there just larger numbers, more of us who are white, who are understanding these risks and patterns in a new way? I hope that's the case, but I don't think we know, at least not yet. It's going to take not only understanding, but a commitment to foundational change for our nation to look back at the death of Mr. Floyd and see that it was a pivotal moment. There's an image that you may have seen of a young African-American girl. She's holding a chalkboard. What the chalkboard says is, Black Lives Matter. We never said only Black Lives Matter. We know that all lives matter. Black lives are in danger. We need your help. Nelson Mandela years ago, this young girl today, they understand that wearing and working through these issues of danger is a holy call. So will we, especially those of us who are white, pay attention long enough to help change these patterns? Will we use our power and energy and resources to end danger? So here's what keeps me up at night some nights. I know there's all these marches, these rallies, these protests. There's this moment of feeling that something is going to change. It's happening during a pandemic. But will we have the collective will? Will we actually have the will to do the work of change? And part of this leads to what my sermon question was for today, is dismantling racism possible? I believe it is. It's possible to end racism. If we think of racism as that set of collective behavior which systematically, consistently push people of color to the bottom and off on the sides based on their color of skin, I believe our collective soul cannot rest while this is a reality. Racism was created by humans, and it is fixable by humans. Martin Luther King made popular the phrase, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." So if justice in this case is ending racism, if justice in this case is equity, if that is the place of the moral universe, if that is where we need to be, can we see today that the arc is actually bending, moving toward equity? How will we know? Author Michael Denzel Smith, he wrote in the Huffington Post specifically about this arc of the moral universe. I think he raises some good questions. He says, the use of the quotation carries the risk of magical thinking. After all, if the arc of the moral universe will inevitably bend toward justice, then there is no reason for us to work toward justice. It's preordained. If it's only a matter of cosmic influence, if there's no human role, then we're off the hook. But this isn't how King meant it. If we look at the evidence of his work, this isn't what Martin Luther King was talking about. But Smith takes us back further. He reminds us that MLK had adopted this phrase from a sermon by Reverend Theodore Parker. He was a Unitarian minister back in the 1840s and 50s. He was before the Civil War. And Smith notes this about a sermon that Theodore Parker wrote in 1853. He said, this is what Parker actually said. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can only divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure that it bends toward justice. So Reverend Parker, he was a transcendentalist. He was working with the other transcendentalists in the liberal religious movements of the time. And he's asking us to imagine what should be. He pictures that justice is way out there, but it's complex enough and it's imprecise enough to be way out of our view. So if we hold today, if we hold this sense of what would a moral universe look like, I think of it as ultimate possibility. Not easily achieved, not clear. And in 2020, I think relative to racism, that goal, that place that the arc is bending towards is equity. So our question is, do we see the next steps to move toward the path to equity? What is it actually going to take to dismantle racism? We know a few things. We know that nothing will be simple here. Systemic racism is layered, and it is deeply, deeply entrenched. As we picture these layers, picture the layers of individuals, each with their own history and fears, ignorance, places of conscience, conscious bias, subconscious bias. So as a people, we have a lot of racism baked into us. But then picture a society where our organizations are intertwined, finance and education, healthcare, real estate, law enforcement, the judicial system, all of these institutions, each with either imperfect actions or outright dangerous policies or rules. All of this serves to perpetuate inequity. So systematic racism is all of these layers. It's individuals collectively, it's the institutions, the organizations, and it all serves to hold status quo in place. If we don't change the foundation of these layers, we are going to keep getting the same result. We will be watching more videos. We will be wondering if this danger is real, and yet we know it is. We'll be asking if change is needed when we knew now, and we have known before, that it is needed. So as a people of faith engaged in ending racism, I invite you to trust two things. First, to trust that equity, yes, it is possible. It is possible to dismantle racism. And second, to trust that collectively we, and when I say we here, I think of we in the absolute broadest sense, that we will have the will and the strength to dismantle racism, to end it. These are holy invitations. They're invitations to a shared vision of what could be, equity, and a commitment, an invitation to stay the commitment, to make the commitment, to stay in the fight and in the struggle as we walk through these layers. So I want to be pretty specific today. My hope is that everyone here who's listening will commit to something, one thing, to help bend the arc. Because I'm not a believer that it's just divinely ordained and it will just happen. So what is it that you can do to help end racism? What is the one commitment that you can make? What is a fit for you? Maybe you're a parent or a grandparent. What is your role as an educator, as a storyteller, a place to expose kids to these realities, to help them work it through? Maybe you're an employee. Where might you work towards equity? What is that piece that fits for you in your job, in your community? Maybe you're a supervisor. Maybe you're somebody who does hiring. What is it that could be your one thing? As a citizen, maybe you need more education on the different laws and policies. Maybe it's a place of open-mindedness and research to look at new models, to understand why you're voting, why you are, and to be engaged in that process. Maybe your one thing is, as a congregant, how might you help lead the congregation in some arc-bending work? Not do it all, but take on a role of leadership to help. And for our youngest learners out there, for our children and our youth, what are your ideas? What are you ready to commit to doing? And how can the adults help? And finally, because I think everybody here somehow can participate in this, if you have financial resources to give, what are the local or national causes that you can find that are having an impact on racism? How can we research these together? Because if you've got financial resources, that is another place to weigh in. Our point is that our voice matters, our money matters, and our compassion matters as we make these commitments. Why one? Because I think if we have one commitment each, something we can write on a note card that we can put on our refrigerator, make another copy and put it on your dashboard, I think one serious commitment is going to outweigh 5 great intentions that evaporate in a month. I thought about what mine is going to be, and here's what it is. I am going to hold a monthly accountability check-in call. I've decided on the first Wednesday of every month at 7, it will be for now a Zoom call, and we are going to have a chance to briefly check in with one another and say how it is going on our commitment. It's not going to be about blame or shame, but a place of encouragement, a place of bouncing around that next idea and staying focused. Why did I pick this? So for me, I see this as spiritual work as your spiritual leader. I want to encourage discernment and I want to encourage follow through. Because I think what really matters here is sustained energy and momentum. So I hope that we will build connections through this call. It's one thing. It's not everything that can be done in the community. There's lots of other ways I may or may not participate, but this is what I'm going to commit to. You don't want to come to that call, okay, check in by email, check in with a friend, send an article into the newsletter. If you need help figuring out what your commitment might be, nothing's coming to mind, check in with me, check in with one of the other leaders in the congregation, check in with a fellow congregant. We can figure this out. I think the other thing I want to touch base on is we need to move ourselves from being in anything that can be described as a neutral stance. You might have seen at a lot of the rallies, one of the signs that was very popular is "Silence is violence." It's a reminder that if we're on the sidelines, if we're just watching this on TV and commenting to our partner, that is not doing anti-racist work. In his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram Kendi sees that we are either racist or anti-racist. He shares, in writing the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, I've had one singular goal. If I could somehow shape the world, what I would hope would come out of this book is very simply that we would eradicate the term "not racist" from the American vocabulary. It would force Americans to recognize that all policies are either racist or anti-racist. So friends, there's no clear path to ending racism. It's going to be incremental work. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be discomfort. There's going to be new relationships. There's probably going to be some broken ones in the process. We need to trust, even when it's murky and we can't quite see how our commitment's fitting in, that there will be tangible effects, that there will be a ripple effect, and there will, in time, be breakthroughs and joy. Ending racism is not check-the-box work. There cannot be any seats on the sidelines. Our reading earlier quoted Nelson Mandela. He knew that climbing one hill was never enough. He would see the next and the next. Racist systems that we are dealing with have been built over centuries. They've been sustained over centuries, and it's lifelong work, generation by generation work to dismantle them. And that only is going to happen. We're only going to be able to dismantle racism if we commit, if we believe the danger. So is George Floyd's death going to have mattered when people look back at this point in our history? Will his death have motivated sustained changes toward that goal, toward that moral point of ending racism? The potential is here, and my hope is together that in the broadest sense of who we are, we will be able to say yes, this was a pivotal moment. May it be so. Blessed be. We're now going to hear our choir do the piece, I Believe. And at the very end of this, you're going to see some credits for the choir piece. That is not the end of the service. That is the credits for the choir piece, and I will be back to do the closing words.
I believe in the sun. I believe in the sun, even when it's not shining. I believe in the sun. I believe in the sun. Even
So our announcements today, just a reminder that the first Wednesday, July 1st at 7 p.m., we will have our first check-in call on our commitments to end racism. If you would like to be on this call, just make sure to let us know and we will get you the Zoom link. We'll also put the Zoom link in the newsletter. Just a reminder that as we enter our summer services, things will be going a little bit differently. So please stay in touch, read your newsletters, and check that out. And as I mentioned, next week, Easton will not be doing Joys and Sorrows, and Chestertown will be having one of their Zoom discussion meetings. So again, check in with each congregation as to what is going on next week. In a moment, I'm going to offer our closing words and extinguish the chalice. And then I invite you to relax and take a deep breath as we show you our postlude slides and our final gratitudes for this service. Our closing words by Israel Bafarde. The road that lies ahead of us is a long one, and the pace of progress will sometimes feel glacially slow. Never forget that glaciers over time can carve out Grand Canyons and Great Lakes. Moving tectonic plates can rise up mountains over millennia, or they can explode awe-inspiring volcanoes in milliseconds. Our commitment to love and justice can do the same. Go in peace. Go in love. Go knowing love surrounds you wherever you may go.